Welcome to the Terror Time.
The first story is about the haunting of Willow Creek Cemetery. It was a night I'll never forget. Dark, cold, and wet. The rain sounds echoed off my car as I drove through the narrow, winding road leading to Willow Creek Cemetery. The place had always been the subject of local horror stories, and I had heard countless tales of people who had gone missing in the area. But I never believed any of it, until that night. I had no reason to be there. I was simply trying to get home, but a detour set me down the wrong road. My GPS had glitched, and the mist that hung over the trees made it impossible to see. Before I knew it, I was at the entrance to the cemetery, the old iron gates standing ominously against the fog. Something about that place sent a chill down my spine, but I shook it off. I wasn't home alone, but I was alone in my car, and the feeling of isolation was overwhelming. As I drove slowly past the gates, I saw a figure standing near one of the graves, barely visible in the rain. At first, I thought it was a person. A mourner, maybe, but something about the way they stood there, perfectly still, unnerved me. I blinked, and they were gone. My heart raced, and I could feel my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. I didn't believe in ghost stories or paranormal activity, but that figure, whatever it was, had shaken me. It felt like I had just stepped into one of those creepypasta stories you read on Reddit, the kind where reality bends and the line between the living and the dead becomes blurred. I sped up, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. The rain intensified, and my windshield wipers struggled to keep up. As I rounded the corner, my headlights illuminated another figure, a woman this time, standing in the middle of the road, her face obscured by her long, wet hair. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. The car skidded to a stop just inches away from her. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, staring at me, or at least I thought she was. Her face was hidden, but I could feel her gaze, cold and unnerving, piercing through the rain. I rolled down the window slightly, my voice shaky. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" No response. She just stood there, silent and still, as the rain poured down around her. My mind raced with 1,000 possibilities, none of them comforting. Was she real? Or was I seeing something else? Something from the other side? The stories I had heard about this place flooded my mind. Stories of ghosts, demons, and the restless dead wandering the cemetery at night. I closed the window and glanced around, hoping to see another car, a house, anything. But there was nothing. Just me, the woman, and the rain. The road stretched on in both directions, disappearing into the fog. It was like a scene from one of those scary videos. The kind where you know something terrible is about to happen, but you can't look away. Suddenly the woman moved. She stepped toward the car, her movements slow and deliberate. I could see her face now, pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and dark. My breath caught in my throat as a sense of dread washed over me. This wasn't a person. This was something else. Something unnatural. I hit the gas, my tires screeching as I sped past her. My heart was racing, and I could barely breathe. The road ahead seemed endless, and the rain made it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see her standing there, but she was gone. Just like that, she had vanished. My mind was spinning. Was it a trick of the light? A shadow? No, it was real. I had seen her. I knew what I saw. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't gone, that she was still watching me, following me through the storm. As I drove further, I saw something else, a flicker of movement in the distance. My headlights caught the figure of a man, standing by a gravestone, his back turned to me. My hands tightened on the wheel as I slowed the car. This couldn't be happening again. Not here, not now. I watched in horror as the man turned around, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. His face was twisted in a grotesque expression, a look of pain and fear that made my blood run cold. He took a step toward the road, and I knew I had to get out of there. I floored the gas, my tires slipping on the wet road as I sped away from the cemetery. The rain pounded against the car, and my heart raced as I tried to put as much distance between me and that place as possible. But as I drove, the figure of the man appeared again, this time closer, standing in the middle of the road just ahead of me. His hollow eyes locked onto mine as I approached, and for a moment, I thought I was going to hit him. But just before the car reached him, he disappeared. I screamed, swerving the car off the road and into the ditch. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I sat there, gasping for breath, my hands trembling as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I didn't believe in paranormal activity, but there was no denying what I had seen. The figures, the woman, the man, weren't human. They were ghosts, trapped in the cemetery, their souls lost and wandering. I had heard scary stories about missing people being found in places like this, but I never thought I would be one of them. As I sat there in the rain, I realized something else. I wasn't alone. The car was cold, too cold, and I could feel a presence beside me, sitting in the passenger seat. I turned slowly, my heart in my throat, and there she was. The woman, her pale face inches from mine, her hollow eyes staring into my soul. The second story is about the vanishing tombstone at Oak Ridge Cemetery. I didn't plan on being in Oak Ridge Cemetery that night. In fact, I didn't plan on being anywhere near it. But as fate would have it, I found myself driving down the old, narrow road that snaked through the woods, the rain sounds drumming on the roof of my car. The cemetery had always been a place of mystery, with countless ghost stories swirling around its history. People had gone missing there. At least, that's what the scary stories said. I wasn't much of a believer in paranormal tales or horror stories, but the unease I felt as I drove through the mist-laden trees was undeniable. I could barely see past the edge of my headlights, and the sense of being watched was overwhelming. The mist clung to the air like a shroud, muffling the world around me. Suddenly, the engine of my car sputtered and died. I cursed under my breath, pulling over to the side of the road. There was no service, no way to call for help, and no other cars in sight. The last place I wanted to be stranded was in front of a cemetery infamous for creepy legends. I got out of the car, rain soaking through my jacket as I looked around, hoping to spot a nearby house or any sign of life. Instead, I saw only the entrance to Oak Ridge Cemetery, its iron gate standing like a portal to another world. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I wasn't home alone, but in that moment, I may as well have been. As I stood there, deciding whether to wait in the car or brave the walk into town, I saw it, a flicker of movement among the graves. My heart skipped a beat. At first, I thought it was a trick of the rain or my mind playing games with me. But then I saw it again, a shadowy figure, moving between the tombstones, almost as if it were gliding. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't possible. There was no one else here. There couldn't be. My pulse quickened as I backed away toward the car, but something inside me told me to stay, to see what it was. It felt like I had stepped into one of those creepypasta stories from Reddit, where the protagonist is helpless, trapped in a nightmare they can't escape. I couldn't take my eyes off the figure as it moved through the cemetery, slowly getting closer. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a person? Or something else? Something from the other side? I had heard the horror stories about Oak Ridge Cemetery, the missing people, the unexplained occurrences, but I never believed any of it. Not until now. The figure stopped, standing motionless beside a large tombstone. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a step closer, my legs trembling with fear. I knew I should leave, get back in the car and drive away, but I couldn't. It was like I was being pulled toward it, like something was calling me. As I got closer, I could see the figure more clearly. It was tall, its features hidden by the mist, but there was something wrong with it, something unnatural. The air around it was colder, and I could feel the temperature drop as I approached. This wasn't a person. This was something else, something paranormal. I stopped a few feet away, my breath visible in the frigid air. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its eyes on me. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, hoping to capture a picture, but my fingers were too numb. It felt like I was living out one of those scary videos you watch late at night, the kind where you know the ending won't be good. Suddenly, the figure turned and disappeared behind the tombstone, vanishing into the mist. I blinked, unsure of what I had just seen. My heart was still racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I stepped forward, my legs barely supporting me, and looked behind the tombstone. There was nothing there, just the gravestone and the muddy ground beneath it. No footprints, no signs of life. It was as if the figure had never been there at all. I turned to leave, my instincts screaming at me to get out of there, but as I did, I noticed something strange. The tombstone in front of me was covered in moss and dirt, barely legible, but I could make out the name, someone who had gone missing years ago. My blood ran cold. This was the grave of one of the people the town had been searching for. I stumbled backward, my mind spinning. The stories were true. The missing people, they hadn't just disappeared. They were here in the cemetery, buried among the forgotten dead. My breath came in ragged gasps as I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't alone. I could feel them. Ghosts watching me from the shadows, their cold eyes locked on me. I ran back to the car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The engine sputtered but didn't start. Panic surged through me as I tried again, glancing back at the cemetery gates. The mist was thicker now, and I could see movement, figures, several of them, moving slowly toward the car. My heart pounded in my ears as I slammed my fist against the steering wheel. The car finally roared to life, and I didn't waste a second. I floored the gas, my tires skidding on the wet road as I sped away from Oak Ridge Cemetery. But even as I drove away, I could still feel their presence. Those ghosts, those lost souls, forever trapped in that forsaken place. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure standing by the tombstone, its hollow eyes staring at me through the mist. I tried watching YouTube Kids videos to calm myself down, but it was no use. The fear clung to me like a second skin, refusing to let go. Days passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been marked, that those ghosts were still with me. The house felt colder, and strange things started happening. Objects would move on their own, and I would hear whispers in the dead of night, even when I was home alone. I knew it was them, the spirits from the cemetery. They had followed me home, and there was no escaping them. The third story is about the disappearance at Blackwood Cemetery. I had never been to Blackwood Cemetery before, but that night, I had no choice. The road leading to my usual route was blocked, and the only way home was through the narrow, winding road that passed the cemetery. It was a cold, damp night, and the rain sounds against my windshield did nothing to calm my nerves. I wasn't usually superstitious, but I had heard the horror stories about this place. Stories of paranormal activity, creepy figures spotted in the shadows, and people who went missing, never to be seen again. As I approached the cemetery gates, the headlights of my car cast eerie shadows on the gravestones. The mist that clung to the air made it impossible to see clearly, and I had the overwhelming sense that something, or someone, was watching me. I tried to shake the feeling off, telling myself it was just the weather, but deep down, I knew better. I had heard too many ghost stories about Blackwood Cemetery. People had warned me about it, the tales of ghosts wandering the grounds at night, searching for the living to drag into the darkness. I never believed those scary stories, but now, sitting in my car with the rain pouring down, I wasn't so sure. I glanced at the clock. Midnight, of course. The one time I had to drive by a haunted cemetery, it had to be at the witching hour. I pressed down on the gas, eager to get home. But as I rounded a bend in the road, I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, right in front of the cemetery gates. My heart skipped a beat. The figure was tall, shrouded in mist, and completely still. I slowed the car, my breath catching in my throat as I tried to make out its features. At first, I thought it was just a person, a night guard, maybe. But something about the way they stood there, unmoving, sent a chill down my spine. It was like something out of one of those creepypasta stories you find on Reddit, the kind where you know something terrible is about to happen, but you can't stop watching. I stopped the car just a few feet away from the figure, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. My heart was racing, and I could feel the cold sweat on the back of my neck. I rolled down the window slightly, the damp air immediately filling the car. "Hey," I called out, my voice shaky. "Do you need help?" No response. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, staring, or at least I thought it was staring. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, and the darkness seemed to cling to it like a shadow. My breath came in shallow gasps as I realized something was very, very wrong. I knew I should leave, but I couldn't move. It was like I was frozen in place, trapped in some kind of living nightmare. The figure began to move, slowly at first, stepping toward the car. My heart pounded in my chest as I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires screeching on the wet road. The car lurched forward, and I sped past the figure, not daring to look back. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw it again. The figure, standing in the road, perfectly still, as if it had never moved at all. Panic surged through me. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I floored the gas, my pulse racing as the cemetery disappeared behind me. But no matter how fast I drove, the feeling of dread wouldn't leave me. It was like the figure had followed me, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, my car hit something. A bump in the road, maybe. The impact sent the car swerving, and I struggled to regain control. The rain was coming down harder now, and the road was slick with water. I skidded to a stop just a few feet away from a large tree, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat there for a moment, gasping for breath, trying to calm myself down. That's when I saw it. Standing at the edge of the cemetery, barely visible through the rain and mist, was the figure. It was closer now, its hood pulled back just enough for me to see its face, or what was left of it. My blood ran cold. The figure's face was pale, gaunt, and hollow, like something out of a true horror story. Its eyes were dark pits, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I slammed my foot on the gas again, desperate to get away, but the car wouldn't move. The engine sputtered and died, leaving me stranded in the middle of the road with no way out. My hands shook as I tried the ignition again, but it was no use. The car was dead. I looked back at the figure, my breath catching in my throat as it began to move toward me again. Its steps were slow, deliberate, and each one sent a wave of fear crashing over me. I fumbled for my phone, hoping to call for help, but there was no signal. Of course, there wasn't. I was trapped, and the figure was getting closer. My mind raced. What was I supposed to do? Get out of the car and run? Stay inside and hope it went away? Neither option seemed like a good idea. I was stuck in a scary story, one that was rapidly turning into a nightmare. The figure was almost at the car now, its face inches from the window. I could see its breath fogging up the glass, and my heart nearly stopped. This wasn't a person. This was something else, something paranormal. The stories were true. The figures people had seen at Blackwood Cemetery weren't human. They were ghosts, lost souls trapped between the living and the dead. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. I blinked, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I looked around. The road was empty. The figure had vanished, leaving me alone in the rain, my heart still racing. I tried the ignition again, and this time, the car started. I didn't waste a second. I floored the gas and sped away from the cemetery as fast as I could, not daring to look back. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure's face, its hollow eyes staring at me through the rain. I tried watching YouTube Kids videos to calm myself down, but nothing helped. The fear clung to me like a shadow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was still watching me, waiting for the right moment to return. The next day, I heard the news. Another person had gone missing near Blackwood Cemetery. They had been last seen driving down the same road I had taken, and their car was found abandoned near the cemetery gates. The police had no leads, but I knew what had happened. The figure had taken them, just like it had almost taken me.